Okay, so good afternoon. Hello to everyone. Welcome to our listeners and welcome to our guest today. I'm Luca Catucci. I'm a member of the US team within the International System World Order Department at ITSS Verona, and I'm with my colleague here, Anurag Mishra. We welcome you both to an exceptional interview, a truly wonderful opportunity to have a chat with Professor Inderjeet Parmar. We're extremely grateful to have him here with us. He is a familiar face on very well-known TV and radio shows, so we're very grateful to have him with us here too. He is a member of our scientific committee, and he currently teaches at the Department of International Politics of City University of London, but he has also held other visiting fellowships and positions in institutions such as Oxford, LSE, Princeton, Manchester University, and he's been past president of the British International Studies Association. He is one of the most acclaimed experts of American politics, and he is indeed also co-editor of a book series, Routledge Studies in U.S. Foreign Policy. And this is why today he will help us shed some light on U.S. domestic and foreign policy in 2023, embarking on a journey that goes from the inner turbulences of the American democratic system to other strategic quadrants. So we'll move also to the Indo-Pacific and Europe. So welcome again, Professor, and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
So Anurag, I believe to start our journey, it's apt to begin within the American shores. So please take the floor and kick it off.
Thank you, Gian. Very welcome, Professor Parmar, and thank you for agreeing to be a part of this. I'm Anurag Mishra. I'm currently pursuing my PhD from School of International Studies, JNU, New Delhi. And so I'll just begin with the questions. And the first question is something that I'm personally interested in because my research is on the Republican Party in the US. Right. So as we know that Donald Trump has already announced his campaign for 24, but has not received the kind of response that he might have expected to receive. And that is also because of the party's poor showing at the midterm elections recently. But on the contrary, I see that Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida has been making all the right noises lately, and is being considered the top Republicans by pundits across the American politics. And so, to some watchers of American politics, Governor DeSantis is seen as a thorough Trumpist in all, for practical matters. He's a conservative figure. He's been the poster boy of American conservatism lately. So if we see DeSantis as a thorough Trumpist, but we also see that he doesn't have the frills of Donald Trump. Like he doesn't tweet at 3 a.m. for that matter. So I am really interested to know how do you see the future of this political force that Ron DeSantis is the poster boy of, which I am calling it for now Trumpism without Trump. So I would like to know how you see the force, this political force going in the future.
Thank you. Yeah, I think Trumpism without Trump is a very good way to kind of sum it up. And I think that's the important thing is that there was a kind of the basis of Trumpism before Trump came along. That is to say that the conditions, political, economic, ideological, racial, cultural conditions were already in place for many years, if not decades, prior to Trump's arrival in 2015, 2016. So what you can say is that Trump, in effect, brought together and coalesced and fused in his own campaign about birtherism during the Obama presidency, as well as the heightened anxieties around, white people being a majority, America being a majority minority nation by 2040 or 2050 or something like that, and alongside immigration. And so if you like, and then I think if you add in then the financial crisis of 2008 and its profound effects across the entire American population and electorate, I think what you had is the conditions for it. Then you add on to that the Tea Party, of course, which had already done a lot of groundwork. And then prior to that, even you could say, as Theda Skocpol work has done, that the domestic political terrain through conglomerates like the Koch brothers complex, they had already created the conditions for the Tea Party, as well as a shift to the right of at the grassroots level, so-called grassroots level, at the local levels of the Republican Party and its kind of environment. So I think you had the basis of Trumpism before Donald Trump. Now, so then when he wins in 2016, in a way, the polarizations are very, very intense, because on the other side, you've got a growing discontent, and Bernie Sanders and the way in which he was defeated for the Democratic primary nomination as well. So in that regard, then, we're on a long journey. It began without Donald Trump, and it's going to end without Donald Trump. That movement has become even more embedded and institutionalized. And now, with the GOP majority, slim majority in the House of Representatives, as well as their senators, who are, a slight minority, they are a far-right political party, far-right political movement, far-right representatives, many of whom deny the 2020 election result, many of whom encourage the insurrection of January 6, 2021, who continue to deny its kind of significance and so on. And so the key problem, I think, politically has been that Donald Trump lost 2020, right? Even though he added millions and millions more votes to his tally, he had a bigger contrary effect than he had an effect in favor of himself. That is, Biden got the biggest record number of votes for anybody who won an election. So, and then since then, he's gone on and on about the 2020 election result, election denying, and so on, which a lot of people are just fed up with. And then, as you said, the recent midterm elections were basically supposed to be a landslide for the Republican Party. Right. I never thought it was going to be a landslide. Yeah, but I mean, I don't know if you follow Michael Moore, actually, and he has got a lot of contact within the Democratic Party strategist groupings and community, and obviously inside track to a lot of information. It was quite clear that the Republicans were exaggerating through various kinds of pretty ropey polls, and the Democrats were playing up the fear of Trump as a way of galvanizing their own electorate in a midterm, which you're expected, generally speaking, to lose badly. And when you look at some of the polling which was taking place, when you go down to the bottom of the page of the article, it said the margin of error here is between 10 and 12%. Now, when you've got margin error of 10 or 12%, that means your poll is rubbish, that you're not going to find anything. But the problem is this made great like media sensationalism, so that, you know, Donald Trump comes back or his Trumpists come back and so on and so forth. It didn't quite happen. But what we've seen since then, when, you know, Kevin McCarthy as a kind of a House Majority Speaker and so on, and the far right is now embedded fully. They are in charge in the House. Right. So Ron DeSantis then, as a governor who has, as you said, embodies all the attitudes and policies, deregulation, mass, you know, rights for corporations, opposition to labor, opposition to minority voting and restrictions on minority voting, governing as if the election of 2020 was stolen, basically banning books, banning critical race theory, which is actually a Trojan horse for banning study and teaching of civil rights and of Black nationalism and of racism and racial inequalities and so on. So what you've got then is a laboratory in Florida for Trumpism without Trump. And elements of that are being rolled out in the Republican states and localities right across the country. So yeah, basically the Republican Party, if it was in Europe, it would be considered a far-right party. The difference is in Europe that there are multiple parties within countries. Right. That is to say, the far-right parties are one party among many. In the United States, it's the second party, right? It is half of the political system. And that means that the far right and some fascists are now fully institutionalized in that body politic. That's the first thing. Second thing is the Democratic Party is an unreliable anti-racist, anti-fascist party as well. It basically is willing to do all sorts of deals with the Republicans. They always talk about bipartisanship. They have not prosecuted a single person who was a ringleader of the January 6, 2021 uprising. Nothing has happened to them. One or two, mostly it's the ordinary people who were on that day who were caught and arrested later, but it hasn't happened. So what you've got is the likes of McCarthy and many others who are in positions of power who have basically been let off. They are emboldened by what has happened. They are not cowed by it. They are proud of it. And they're continuing to govern on that kind of basis. So the key thing is that the mass of ordinary people, middle class and working class people in America, as in many countries, are resisting the onslaught on their living standards, their health, and the level of taxation that they're suffering, and the wars which are being waged on their behalf. There's a massive upsurge of left and socialism among millennials and so on, as well as a big strike wave. So what you've got is massive, and then of course George Floyd, then the recently Tyree Nichols killing by 5 black policemen and so on, which is an interesting thing in itself. What it shows is that upsurge of resistance and discontent is going to carry on because there's no solution to their problems coming from the government. And the consequence of that is that the American political system is going to remain, if you like, turbulent and violent, because that resistance is going to be put by massive repression. So Trumpism without Trump, yeah, but I would forget Donald Trump now. He may hang around for a bit more in one way or another, but that sort of far right embeddedness in the American body politic is now there for quite some time to come.
Oh, you covered it pretty comprehensively, sir. And thank you for the answer. Like quite a few points that you raised that I will myself look into because it was quite, it was really good.
Yeah,
so
I look forward to
yeah.
speaking with you more about this. Actually, I didn't realize that was your PhD, but I would be very interested to speak with you in general about. Yeah, it'd be amazing.
Outside the scope of this interview, but yes, it will be great to interact.
Sure, yeah,
so I'll ask upon Gianluca to ask the second question, and if he has any points to make, he can very well do so. So Gianluca, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. First of all, I think the points that were underlined by the professor are very relevant, especially in the sense that they underline the structural factors of internal politics, which don't depend necessarily on the personality of the leader sometimes. And this can be extended to the international sphere. And it's what I'm going to focus on in my question. In fact, these structural forces that after the Second World War, after the post-Cold War, of course, have been shifting from what we saw initially as the unipolar moment of the United States to a shift towards a multipolar order. So with more states that are asking for a voice in the international sphere. President Trump is also relevant in this sense because his presidency, the trademark of his presidency was the fight against the multilateral order, which was seen as a ripoff, basically, for the United States, and a pretty isolationist policy. Today, President Biden has a different platform, but presents also some continuities with former President Trump. For example, with boosting the trade war against China, failing to revive the Iran nuclear deal. However, he is also facing Russia heads on through basically a proxy in Ukraine, we could say. Indeed, it appears that the strategic competition that was kind of out of the picture for some time is coming back, and America is clinching on to its role as the dominating power. It seems that it doesn't want to cede its throne, basically, to the contenders and the so-called revisionist powers. If one analyzes, the situation in the United States in the last decade or two, one sees a fragile and dysfunctional democratic system, as you were underlining before, suffering from, like all major powers, from the impacts of COVID, climate change, the war in Ukraine, inflation, the 2008 crisis. This would lead us to believe, indeed, in the end, that for America, the time is up as the sole dominator of the system. But then if we look at what is happening today, within its competitors, we see China facing, internal problems following COVID, weaker population growth, slowed down economic performance, even the construction bubble almost exploding. Iran in the midst of an existential crisis, Russia bogged down in a war it cannot apparently win. So the US is showing reluctance to cede its throne. It seems it's strengthened by the weakness of its opponents. And I'd love to know what your opinion is on this. I've put many elements on the table. Unfortunately,
yeah. It's a massive question, and I think what you've done really nicely in your question is shown how difficult it is to keep your feet on the ground and find any place which doesn't move as soon as you blink. And I think that's what world politics actually probably has always been. And I suspect that it's going to remain like this. It's turbulent, it's transitional, it's changing all the time. And I would say that you're right, that the US, we should not forget, despite its crises, which are not new, remains very resilient. It remains very powerful in a whole number of different ways. It remains the reserve currency, the dollar. It remains the principal means by which international payments are made. They can sanction you by removing you from the SWIFT system and so on. Your market is absolutely the biggest market in the world in terms of purchasing power. So people need you. So the tariffs are painful. And you see that whenever Trump had put, $250 billion of tariffs on China, China would come back with what? $60 billion worth, right? The Chinese economy is reliant on the world economy and including on the United States economy, and to some extent, vice versa, some extent. So the US is resilient, and militarily, and I know so well how much they spend every year and how much of proportion of world military spend that they undertake. So, and economically, as an economy, it goes through its problems and so on, but it continues to grow at a decent pace, and it does therefore carry on very well. And the second thing I'd say is no hegemonic power just gives up willingly, right? Britain didn't, although there was a fairly decent handover, but it was turbulent in its own way. It was fractious in its own way. It wasn't done willingly. It was done, through gritted teeth, in a gradual manner over time, but it was a humiliation for Britain, and it has been a humiliation for Britain. So if two powers, which are Anglo-Saxon powers, Anglo-American powers, with this shared history and culture, language and traditions and liberal kind of ideology and so on, if they have such fractious parting of the ways, then what are you going to get when you get a non-European power, which is nowhere near superpower parity with the United States, but could be there in 30 to 40 years or so. So the US is going to hang on as much as it possibly can. But on the other hand, I think, as I was saying about the Republican Party, domestic politics, the legitimacy crisis within the American domestic system, the fact is that some strengths can appear strengths and then they can be weaknesses as well. So this time, well, was it now February? Around, well, a few weeks' time, it's the anniversary of the start of the Ukraine war. It looked like Russia was going to be on its knees very quickly. Russia was going to be cancelled. I mean, that's what the language people were using. Russia cannot win. It is going to lose. They switched off all the systems and said, we're going to bring the Russian economy to its knees. It's not, right? India is selling through secondary means, oil and energy. So is China, and so are many other countries as well. Russia is negotiating with China on the Belt and Road Initiative and the Eurasian Economic Union, much more of a partnership. The BRICS are closer. They're not applying the sanctions that the US demands. regarding Ukraine. There's only 18 or 20 entities and states in the world which means over 200 are not. So you've got most of the global South telling the United States, we're not doing it. Russia, Saudi Arabia, core ally of the United States, is not producing more oil because Biden goes there, because they're part of OPEC Plus, and they're mutually investing in each other's economies and so on and so forth. So what you've got actually is a very volatile kind of situation where the US, is waging a relatively cheap war in some respects, but that war could come home because people are suffering inside the United States as well. And so continuing to send, more tanks and talking about F-16 possibilities, encouraging the Germans, encouraging the Czechs and others to send more arms and so on, it is a proxy war, as you said. It's a NATO proxy war. That can easily become a weakness as well. And you see in Europe, people are suffering from the high prices of energy. Part of that is because the US is taking advantage of the European situation by selling liquefied natural gas at 4 times the price they were paying to Russia for their energy then. So the US is smart, but it is also in a sort of competitive world crisis, and it sees dangers to itself in many places. Even its own allies are not fully compliant as they used to be. It cannot just now go anywhere and demand and sanction other countries through, for example, secondary sanctions, because regional powers are economically more powerful. They have more regional allies, and every state in the world pretty much has options other than the United States. That is to say, they diversified their range of relationships in part because of the unreliability of the United States as an ally and partner in many respects over the last 20 years. And it's kind of unilateralism. And that's been brought home, particularly during the Trump period. And people are, kind of, if you like, they are becoming more resilient by diversifying themselves. And even the Southeast Asians, for example, are not willing to go along entirely with the United States because they know they depend on on China. And so that's one set of ways. The other one is, of course, the interpenetrations of China and the West and of the United States economies and financial systems and so on. Obviously technologically, militarily, security-wise, there are big issues and some decoupling going on. But actually, there's a large amount of investment in one another's economies, which is fundamental as well. So while you have the kind of security jockeying for position and the interhegemonic jockeying for position, you also have a lot of interdependence and interpenetration of one another's economies, which means that they are also kind of tied to one another as much as they are also conflicting geopolitically. So China wants to get out of the subordinate position. The United States wants it to remain in a subordinate position. And that is the kind of big sort of fulcrum of conflict, which is going on, really. And so I would say that the US is not out of the woods. I think, and these other countries, as you say, they're in crisis. I don't know in many countries which are not in some kind of domestic crisis, which has international effects. And the biggest danger from all of that is the rising ultranationalism and the nationalist rivalries and the external threat construction, and therefore kind of the construction of the other who is going to invade your territory, invade an ally, and so on. And the arms races which are breaking out, which are symptomatic of that. So you just look at the Indo-Pacific, Japan, I don't know, 56% increase in their military spend for the next 5 years. South Korea is also doing the same. The US has got 4 new military bases in the Philippines, and so on and so forth. There, the deal. So I don't think it's a great time for the United States, but there are sort of multiple developments in different directions, which means it's a very difficult to sort of pin it all down in an easy way.
Yeah, indeed. And I hear a bit of yeah. But still, thank you very much for your insightful analysis. It is indeed extremely complex to find a way in this labyrinth of different relationships. Let's hope that, as you were saying, the persisting interdependence between major world economies would avoid the worst outcomes, of which we may have an opportunity to speak of following Anurag's further questions. And so, since you also brought us into the Indo-Pacific theater with this last comment, I believe we can also move there. Anurag, do you have something to add or ask?
I think it was a pretty difficult question to answer because, as Professor rightly mentioned, there are so many developments happening in so many directions that to bring them all to one table and make an analysis of all those things happening, it's pretty difficult. And about ceding the hegemony, like he rightly said, and Mishra also writes that no superpower ever lets go of its hegemony. So if US is resisting or it's reluctant to cede its hegemony, I think it's something that they're going to do in the future. Also, they're trying to go all the lengths to keep China from becoming bigger, or as some people mention, containing China through different apparatus like Quad or AUKUS, or engaging more with ASEAN. So I think it was a pretty good question and equally wonderful answer. The next question, Professor, I have is it's since I come from India, it is a question which relates to US-India relationship. So the question is that as I see, America and India do not have a history which goes long back. Like until Bill Clinton, India and US did not have a very warm relationship, and they had quite a few hiccups in the past also. So as far as partnership or friendship goes, we don't have some great history there. Until the 21st century, the two countries hardly converged on issues of global or national importance. The relationship has generally been on the upswing lately, with Obama coming here and Donald Trump coming here, and the camaraderie between Modi and Obama and Trump. But we do see that at times there are things happening. For example, the Religious Freedom Index comes once every year, and there are comments made by the White House and from the Indian Foreign Ministry about how we understand that, right? So once in a while we see that there are points which where the two countries seem not to be going in a great warm, friendly manner ahead. So against this backdrop, I have a question: that do you think the reservations the Democratic Party has about the Bharatiya Janata Party, and the Bharatiya Janata Party being the political front of the RSS, so and partly seen as a Hindu nationalist force, so do you think the reservations that the Democratic Party has with respect to the Bharatiya Janata Party affect the relationship between the two countries whenever we have a Democratic president in the White House and when you have a BJP government in India? So do you see, like, how do you see that? That's the question.
Yeah, well, I think I would say, I mean, it's a difficult question, but I would say that the Democratic Party's basic underlying philosophy is a lot more secular than most parties, right? And I think it applies to the BJP as well. But I don't think it's a major roadblock, however. I think the US can use the Religious Freedom Index, etc., as a stick to beat others with. And when it was to apply it to itself, it may find that there's a lot of problems going on at home as well. But I think the key thing is that India is in an ambiguous strategic position, and it has many ambitions for great power, to become a great power itself. And I think from the 1947 probably, or 1950, it has had that kind of independent idea that it is a power and it should be a power in the world. Population and so on and so forth, strategic position, Pacific Ocean, Indian Ocean, etc. It's also had an identity as a post-colonial nation, as in we are part of the post-colonial bloc. We want to sort of ally with others or be partners with others to sort of have a bit more heft in world politics as well. So the Asian Relations Conferences, Bandung, and other places. And then part of the kind of non-aligned movement as well, a major leading power then, again, between the superpowers, courting both, hedging both, taking some advantage of both as well. And then I guess you got India's neutralism and so on. So I think India is, in a way, playing some smart hands, from a kind of certain position that they come from. And the US doesn't like it. But the thing is, I think India's also, there's a great book by Atul Bhardwaj, who came to visit us at City a couple of years ago, where he looks at India as a part of the liberal international order and kind of shaped by it, so that it actually had far closer relations with the US than it did with the Soviet Union, right through the Cold War, but was able to play a kind of a middling, so-called neutral kind of role. So what I would say is that, I don't think the BJP being in power is ideal for the US. And even during Trump, he was threatening all kinds of sanctions, various kinds of immigration, and all the stuff he was accusing China about copyright theft and intellectual property. India's a past master, that kind of thing. So he was saying that stuff as well. So I don't think it's a major problem.
Okay, that's great. So Gianluca, I think I've got the next question as well, which is kind of extension to this question itself. It again has it's about Quad. So just recently, we saw Secretary of State Mike Pompeo during Trump's presidency. He's released a book in which he makes a comment where he says that India had joined Quad only after the skirmishes that happened with its border with China. And, because India suffered, and that is something which was kind of triggering for India to become a part of an international order or an international organization which was still shaping. Although Quad goes long back since former prime president or prime minister of Japan. I'm sorry, I keep getting confused. So what he says against that backdrop suggests that again the transactional nature of India's security partnership with the US. I say transactional because we have a long time relationship with Russia and with US with all the treaties being signed. So it kind of seems that it is transactional because US needs India because of the strategic position, the geostrategic position that India has, and then India also tries to diversify where it brings its stuff from, military equipments and everything. So the relationship does not, to me, it seems that it is transactional more than ideological or real friendship that we once probably had with Russia. No longer I see, but it seems more transactional. So the question is, how significant, if at all, you think Quad is to regional security architecture? Time and again, they have all the states, the member states of Quad have said that it's not a military organization. We don't have any military plans. But if we see in reality or how people talk about it, how significant is it to the regional security architecture of the Indo-Pacific, the Quad?
Yeah, I don't think it is actually that strategically important. If you look at what's going on, you got AUKUS, the Australia, UK, US security agreement. You got Japan increasing its military budget and going to be much more aggressive and proactive. You got South Korea doing the same. You got the American bases in the Philippines. You got the French, Canadian, and British navies patrolling in that region as well. India sees itself more Indo than Pacific. Why should it not be transactional? Everything we know about India since 1947 is that it wants to be its own state, powerful. It doesn't want to be in hock to anybody else. It has the multiple identities. The Anglosphere would want it to be part of the Anglosphere. It's an English-speaking country in large number of English-speaking people and so on. But they don't want it as a full member. It's not an Anglo-Saxon English-speaking country and so on. So it's always going to be benefit for whom? And Quad is not NATO in Asia, but NATO from Europe is in Asia, right? So they're going around those countries like India, which they cannot effectively mold to what they would like them to be. And they're working with those longer term allies that they have greater heft and support from, although even they are not totally secure, and they're securing their own interests in the hedging game between them and the United States.
So would it be right to assume that Quad again is transactional for India, like everything else, still transactional.
Yeah, it's a
So
pretty cheap one.
Once China extends the hand of friendship,
Yeah.
so India would be, I think, more than ready to take it, I guess.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
keep again the relationship with the US at an arm's length, and be friends with China
if
again.
if you have multiple lovers, and each one brings you something, then
right.
then you're transactional, right? So There you are.
Thank you for the answer. I think we have very short time left for this meeting, so maybe Gianluca, you can create another link, and
Yes,
then we can
indeed.
carry forward.
I was thinking,
with the other
since we have just a couple of questions left, if it's fine for you, I create another link so we can finish this interview better. Okay, perfect. So I'll just close this quickly and send you immediately another link. Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay.
Since we're speaking also to an academic, I'd like to ask a question that is more related to IR theory, we could say. In fact, before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, there were intelligence agencies publicizing and anticipating the invasion, especially UK, US, and Baltic agencies, anticipating this invasion in a way that really entered our households, so going beyond the usual secrecy of intelligence. There are many schools of thoughts, many opinions on why this happened. Some say it was a calculated effort to prepare Western opinion of the invasion. In fact, that's why sanctions and weapon supply immediately followed. Others say that this was strategically done to expose Putin and thus invade the invasion. More maliciously, one could say from a critical perspective that this was a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy in a constructivist sense. So what I mean is that speaking of and describing accurately this buildup, anticipating what was believed to be an escalation, actually led the leaders to act in a way that objectively confirmed this belief. So leading to war as the only plausible and possible option. Which of these claims, first of all, do you find more convincing? And do you believe that some similar, let's say, behavior in the context of Taiwan could fuel this other potential war?
Sure, thank you. Well, I think you summed it up in those three positions quite well, and that the kind of realist perspective that is put forward, the constructivist and other. I think it's all of those actually. I think it is an incredible, and it's even more. There are those who apply a post-colonial perspective to Ukraine in regard to Russia. There are other post-colonialists who apply the more traditional post-colonial claims about NATO and Europe and kind of expanding eastward as well, and violating sovereignty pretty much at will in the global south, which they have done historically and continue to do more recently as well. So there are a whole range of perspectives. And I guess great powers, however you conceive of them, whether you see them as imperial colonial powers or just as great powers in the realist sense or whatever, they compete for influence and power with one another, build alliances as we know, the United States is very smart. It seeks to fight on terrain which is most advantageous to itself and least advantageous to its enemy. And it's quite clear that when we look historically, NATO has expanded massively since 1990, right? It was supposed to be formed in 1949 to meet the Soviet threat, the imminent fear of invasion by the red communists and so on and so forth, and successfully held the gates of Europe closed for 45 years or 50, nearly 40 years or whatever, 45 years. But NATO, where is it now? It's inside old Soviet territory, and it's campaigning for even more. So I think what you could say is that great powers expand where they can, and they have been, and that is a big issue. Other great powers respond to those others, and that's what Russia has done. Russia was in a very weak position for a long time. It, if you like, allowed some of the kind of Baltic states in the former Soviet Union to join NATO in the 1990s, early 2000s. It then stood up against Georgia and others joining in 2008. It then also encroached in Crimea in 2014, and I think it would have probably invaded Ukraine in some way or other around the time that it did for various reasons. So I don't think there's one side to blame. I think these are great powers, and they see other territories and states which are between them as a fair game. And Ukraine is the one which is suffering more than anybody else. The Ukrainian country, the economy, the people, their cities and towns, their properties, and so on. So I think they do goad one another, and the intelligence has credibility problems because of what happened in 2003 with Iraq, that we were sold a false bill of goods and so on, and that led to major catastrophes. This time the intelligence actually happened to be correct, but nobody else outside of that can possibly know. But even before that, I don't know if you're familiar, there was a Rand Corporation paper, 2019. I can't remember the exact title of it now, but the idea was that one of the strategies that the United States can use in order to bring on a Russian attack on Ukraine at a time and place which is more advantageous to the United States than it is to Russia would be something to encourage, but to keep limited to that country, to Ukraine, as a way of bogging Russia down, of weakening its regime, its credibility, and weakening the hold of Putin and so on, weakening Russia overall. So I'd say I would add to the list of theories. I would say Antonio Gramsci is very important here. I would say Lenin is really important in this understanding of this kind of these series of relationships. But in the end, what all of those theories suggest is that these great powers, imperial, colonial, or other, they don't care about the lives of ordinary people. Ordinary people are suffering massively in that country, and they are paying the price. And the oligarchs and the supporters of the regime in Ukraine, in Kiev, are enabling it. They're enabling it. They're not talking about diplomacy or peace or anything, because I think they actually they have brought this war on to themselves. The election of 2017 was on the basis of the Minsk II agreement and a neutrality between Russia and NATO, and they didn't keep to that. They were more aggressive in that period. So it's a very, very complicated position, and the position I take on it is that you can have as many theories as you want, but in the end, the great power resides in those particular powers, and ordinary people are actually suffering greatly. And the regime in Kiev is clamping down on all critics of its regime, right? Left-wing parties, pacifist groups, anybody who's dares to challenge them, closing down media, etc. So this is not a war of democracy versus autocracy, as it is claimed, or a rules-based order versus autocratic power or whatever, expansionism. It's a good old game of imperial power politics, and in imperial power politics, it's your average people who give their lives, and that's exactly what's happening.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you very much. I believe the situation really deserved to be analyzed from this multiplicity of perspectives. Otherwise, we risk just scratching things on the surface, but there are many issues really to be considered. And I think what you also mentioned is very relevant because I believe you have done some research also on the role of private think tanks and lobby groups and the impacts on American foreign policy and imperialism. And that is really something that deserves to be investigated even more. I found that particularly interesting, that point of the Rand Corporation, and how in the same way as intelligence agencies building the identity of the enemy, the same could be said for these private think tanks, which have already shaped. I mean, there's a history of them shaping American security policy and studies in the nuclear age. So it's really something to look out for. And so I believe we can now go to the conclusion of our interview with one just last question.
Yes.
There's supposed to be a bargain whereby the UK influences American foreign policy in exchange of this loyalty. What is your view, your take on the special relationship? Because it's been said that the UK never has been able and never will be able to influence American foreign policy.
I think that if you think about it as a kind of a drug, which the British foreign policy establishment has been taking since about 1944, I think you can say that it's a way of knowing and living with the fact that you are the past, and the only way you're going to carry on into the future is if you ally with the greatest power which is emerging at that particular time, which held the balance of power in Europe and so on. So, if you like, to some extent, that so-called special relationship invented by Winston Churchill was an attempt to kind of live with that, but with a mythology that perhaps through that there would be the emperor's ear would be available to the UK foreign policy elites and so on, with a view to influence. But I think if you see it like that, then of course Patrick Porter is right. It is sort of ideological or mythological and so on. But I would say that it's much more, actually more important than just dismissing it as mythology or ideology, because the United States and Britain jointly architected the Bretton Woods world system during the Second World War. They jointly fought with others as well, the Korean War, which helped to establish properly NATO, rearmed Germany, and it actually created sort of Anglo-American power as well. And what you can say then is that NATO, Five Eyes, the Anglosphere, the kind of economic and financial union between the City of London and Wall Street, all of these are very, very powerful structural factors. And Britain remaining committed as a global power, able and willing to fight pretty much anywhere the United States goes, and sometimes going before the United States then enters. But you can say that it's much more than mythology. That's real. Those naval ships may not be the decisive factor. Those squadrons in Iraq in 2003 may not be decisive, but it provides a huge amount of diplomatic and political and other kinds of support for what it's doing. They share the same concepts of world order in effect, and therefore they see their interests as very, very similar, not identical, but very similar. And when you look at, say, Five Eyes as the intelligence system, then you've got the other elements of the Anglosphere. If you look at some of the work done on the actual networks, the policy networks and so on, there are about 38 separate networks which combine Canada, the US, Australia, New Zealand, and the UK. And they've been going since the 1940s. And there's interoperability between their military forces and so on. And this is not just another group of people. This is not just a mythological drug or special relationship. This is actually real, tangible, material power. Second thing is, it has a huge amount of ideational, cultural, and linguistic power too. The English language as a kind of, as the language of the world, of development, of finance, of everything pretty much, is a very, very powerful factor in their power and influence in the world too. The idea that they stand for democracy and freedom, and the rules-based order, the liberal international order of peace, security, democracy, prosperity, etc. Those are powerful factors in world politics. The US is the lead, but the UK is there. Australia, New Zealand, Canada are also in various ways there too. So I think it's far more important than to dismiss it as mythology, just because on the question of influence, the UK doesn't exercise huge influence, or if any influence, over the United States. But I would say when, for example, after 9/11, when George W. Bush and the others wanted to go after Iraq straight away, Tony Blair did say to them, No, Afghanistan, not Iraq. And they did listen, and they said we'll save Iraq for later, which they did. So, I mean, that's no big deal in world politics. They ruined the country 2 years later than they wanted to, and has had worldwide effects, including on the politics of their own countries through the refugee and other crises. So I would say it's far more powerful, and I think it's sort of fairly superficial to dismiss all of these factors, which are really major powerful factors. One of the great things that if you look at, say, the work of he derived a lot of his work about soft power from Antonio Gramsci, with whom he cites only in a footnote in a book in 1990. The fact is that hegemony is coercion and consent, and a balance, some sort of combination of the two. And I think the Anglosphere, at the core of which is the Anglo-American alliance, embodies those, that cultural imperialism, as well as military imperialism, financial imperialism, and economic imperialism. It has all of those kind of factors. So I would not dismiss it at all. It has a huge kind of underlying racial cultural identity. And a lot of the yellow fever, yellow peril politics, and so on, and nuclear apartheid ideas that they have, and so on, are underpinned by that kind of racialized strategic thinking. And when Donald Trump was president, he had the head of the policy planning staff of the State Department, Kieran Skinner. She said it out loud. That she said, China is not a Caucasian culture. It's not a Caucasian country. We don't know what they stand for, what they might do. They're not even Russian Soviet Marxists. At least Marxism is a Western philosophy. We could understand that, which is a far cry from what they were saying during the Cold War, by the way. But there's the Chinese are the mysterious, inscrutable. You have no idea how they think, what they think. This Asian mind is impenetrable. So what do? Therefore, you surround them with a ring of steel, and you ascribe all kinds of nefarious ideas or attitudes or expansionist plans, usually without any evidence or very little evidence. So I would say this Anglosphere, the Anglo-American alliance, its surrounding ideologies and language and so on, I think those are very, very powerful factors in the hegemony of the Anglo-Americans, and it continues to be a very, very significant factor. It's material, cultural, and ideational, and institutional, and so on, all at once. It's an incredible piece of architecture.
Yeah.
And there's a fantastic book which just came out by a guy called Patrick Kors, who's he's a German historian in the United States, I think, called The New Atlantic Order. 1,000 pages, absolutely unbelievable. And he's not a Gramscian, but I think he's doing Gramscian type work. He doesn't call himself a dialectician, but I think he's doing dialectics actually in the comprehensiveness of the analysis. And he finishes around 1929, starts around 1860. When I was listening to his talk yesterday at LSE, and also got his book here, it strikes me that there's many things going on now which kind of are very reminiscent of that kind of turbulence of that entire kind of so-called long 20th century period. And I think we need, as scholars, to really take seriously the necessity for very deep, wide, and inclusive scholarship, so that we get all the currents of world politics, and try to give them weight and and relativity and so on, but not ignore any, and not just be kind of focused only on great men and great powers and that kind of thing. And I think that's what his book does, and it's just an amazing example and model of scholarship. So we're in this sort of period in the world today where it's easy to say a few things, but it's harder to sustain them through serious evidence, and I think that's what we need to do a lot more of.
Yeah, we'll certainly note the name of the book down, and it also hints to, a new multipolarism, not only in great power politics, but also in scholarship and in academic discussion about some really crucial topics. And
Absolutely, and there's a new global knowledge order, really, in the making. There are more powers, more views, more media outlets, more scholarly outlets, and more contestation.
Yeah.
And I think we're living in a great time in that regard. And so that idea of global knowledge, I think, fundamental now.
Yeah.
Anyhow, thank you very much.
Thank you again, Anurag. Unless you have something to add, I'd say we can close the interview here.
I think we're good. I just want to thank Professor Parmar again. The last answer in particular was very revealing, and it was, particularly I found out things which I wouldn't have thought in that manner. And thanks once again. It was a pleasure talking
thank
to
you. And it'd be nice to chat with you some other time about your PhD work also.
Definitely, sir. Definitely, yes.
All right.
We'll stay in touch, try to, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much.
I'll pause the recording. If you have any other comments, we can briefly address it after I close it. So thank you to our listeners. Keep following us. And thank you, Professor. Goodbye.
Thank you.